Hello, I am Doug Daniel, and this is my country report, and I did it on China. So, population growth. In the 1970s, China had a real problem with their population, and it was so large, and they were afraid that they couldn't really control it. They couldn't afford it. They didn't have enough resources to feed everyone. So they adopted the one-child policy, which basically meant you could only have one child, and if you tried to have more than that, they would have forced abortions. And obviously that's been criticized by many human rights people and just people all over the world. To help implement that, they would also have benefits for people who followed it. For instance, better housing, better health care, things like that to try and convince them to stay with one child. However, in rural areas, this rule has been growing more relaxed, allowing for more population growth. And so they can maybe have one or two, maybe even three children instead of just the one. However, this is a good change, but couples are still encouraged to wait to marry and then space out their children, so a child every 10 years or so. And this is only in rural areas. In urban areas where there's still overcrowding, they really aren't allowing it and sticking to this one-child policy. However, you can see that even with this one-child policy, they still have a large population growth, and it's been growing steadily for the past 40 or so years, but it's less exponential and more linear compared to a ginormous population that would have happened if they had not implemented this policy. So, increased consumption. China's economy usually was industry-driven until only currently, where it was more service-driven, and they're consuming a lot more food and beverages and making more of those jobs. This is best shown by the increase of Starbucks and meat, and then the decrease of steel. So steel prices have been dropping so much that they had to lay off about 500,000 people, and the government had to implement a $600 billion stimulus program to keep it afloat. And their meat consumption, their imports, is growing at an annual rate of 150%, and in the Shanghai area, there are 450 Starbucks currently, and within the next year they are set to make 300 new ones, showing that the service industry has really exploded. The consumption of the service industry and the goods produced there has really exploded. Environmental degradation. China really has a problem with air pollution. They have problems with other pollution, but they've really tried to focus on air because they have so many factories, but really not a lot of rules to help cut down on pollution. However, even though they have all this pollution, the citizens don't really seem too concerned. Out of 40 countries that were interviewed, China seemed the least concerned. A quote was, "I'm not concerned because I'll be dead before it affects me." So they really don't care about the future, they just care about themselves now. However, they have been having to wear masks in larger cities where the pollution is so bad, the smog, that they can't really breathe the air. It's so toxic. So the government is focused on air pollution and are currently trying to implement a new carbon trading system that should be in place by 2017. And what this carbon trading system is they put a cap for every company and business for how much carbon they produce, and if they produce more than that, it costs more. And so it only works if the cap is set at a right spot. If it's too generous, then they don't really cut down on any of it. And in the case of the European Union, it doesn't work at all. And they just have to kind of throw it away and make sure that the cap is in the right spot. So migration. Some Chinese are moving from rural areas. Well, most Chinese are moving from rural areas to urban areas, but some are moving back out of the larger cities to become farmers. And the reason for these people to move out of urban into rural is that they want to establish a new trust between the Chinese and the farmers, because recently there have been discoveries like leather being put into milk for extra protein and discussing things like that have really destroyed their trust. And they also want to kind of regain the Chinese food culture. However, most of the trend is that people are moving from rural to urban areas, and the Chinese government has really been stressing this, and they want 50% of their population be urbanized by 2020 and 70% by 2030. And to help with this transition, they've been rapidly building railways and housing and utilities and things like that to support the population over the last 25 years. So, scarcity and poverty. China has made huge strides in decreasing poverty in the last 40 plus years, lifting over 680 million people out of poverty. That's a decrease of 84% of their population to 10% of their population being in poverty. And it also accounts for about 75% of the world's total decline in extreme poverty. However, even though they've solved the poverty problem, they still have a huge scarcity problem, particularly in water. In Beijing alone, the water table below there has dropped over 1,000 feet since the 70s, and it can only support 12 million out of the 22 million people that live there. And another problem is that their water has been contaminated. A third of the rivers and 62% through groundwater has been contaminated through pollution and factories and things like that. So currently they are making a system that diverts water from the south to the north, and it has just started reaching the north. It was an $80.5 billion project, but they don't believe that this is going to truly fix the problem all the way, and they may need more solutions. So conflict. China's not really in any wars right now, but they have a conflict in the South China Sea where they've sent their navy and they've built man-made islands and took over a shoal about 145 miles from the Philippines, but it's also 620 miles from China. And they have been blocking the fishermen, which has kind of hurt the Philippines' economy. Recently, the United States has stepped in and sent the Philippines around $40 million in military aid, and they're trying to get the fishers back into their area and protect them so that they can continue fishing and boosting the economy. Recently, there's an international court ruling that said China really has no legal basis for being in the South China Sea or claiming the territory, but China has disregarded this and said that the international court had no authority dealing with this issue. So finally, discrimination. They're very discriminatory against females. About 1.3 million female babies are aborted every year in China and India. And the reason for this is that they really want a male child. They want, because they believe that he's stronger and able to carry out more work compared to a female who is just kind of married off and never really seen again after they grow up. And also, it's a very homophobic country. Recently, there has been a lawsuit in progress against a mental hospital because a man divorced his wife after 10 years and admitted that he had same-sex attractions. And he was almost immediately taken to a mental hospital. He was force-fed and strapped down drugs for 19 days and beaten to try and fix him. They still believe in like electroshock and beatings and force-fed drugs, things like that, to try and fix it. They believe it's a mental illness. It was just recently changed in 2001 that it's not officially a mental illness, but many people still believe that it is. So this is all you need to know about China. Thanks.